All right, welcome back to another episode of D Community Conversations. I am Mike Parker, and I am here with Mathias Lang. Did I get it right this time? Yeah,
Yep.
I made
Yep.
an effort. I made an effort. Yeah. So before we get started, I want to give a big shout out to Weka. Weka is a fast-growing company that is building a cloud and AI native data platform that helps to solve complex data challenges for the world's leading enterprises and preeminent research organizations. And Weka is a great place to work for developers looking to sharpen their decoding skills and to work on really interesting use cases. And if you don't know about Weka or want to learn more about them, you can check out the description below. I'll have some links there. You'll find a link to their website. You'll find a link to a DConf 2018 presentation that talks about what they do with D. And you'll find a link to an interview on the D blog about how they built the world's fastest file system in D. But Mathias, you do not work for Weka.
Nope.
Yes. So you and I have known each other for a while now, but there may be some people out there in the community who don't know you. So why don't you tell everyone watching a little bit about who you are?
All right. So Mathias Lang, I'm a software engineer by teaching, I guess, by trade. I've been in the D community since late 2012. I started when I was still a student, and I gradually contributed more and more towards the compiler. So I started contributing to Vibe, then I went to Dub for both different time, and I ended up contributing quite a bit to DMD. Nowadays, I think I mostly contribute to Dub, mostly because no one else is doing it, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
All right. Well, before we get to your D career, why don't you tell us how you got started with D? I mean, this is always a fascinating. I'm sorry, not how you got started with D, but how you got started programming. What got you into programming in the first place? I know people are interested in hearing this kind of thing, and I'm fascinated by everybody's different stories. Were you like a kid when it started, a child, or was it later in middle school, high
Well,
school?
so I've made several tries into programming while I was growing up, starting from middle school, but didn't really get into it. I it was yeah, I didn't have a mentor, and it was quite hard at the time. The internet wasn't what it was today, and the learning resources were more scarce, and books were more targeted for older people. So I think I really got into programming when I started university. Simply put, my parents thought I was good with computers, so they put me in a programming school. It was a bit of a different school because there was not a lot of classes. It was really project based. So they would give you one project on Monday, and you would have a certain number of weeks to do it. They were very strict into how the programming had to be done. So any typo could land you a zero on the assignment, even if you did everything perfectly. And that was quite a good school for me for my approach to programming. So we started with pure C, no libc except for the syscall bindings, obviously. And we build our own C standard library in first year. So you write printf, strlen, and whatnot. We wrote on our own shell. So a lot of very bare bones project, but that made it really useful to understand the whole, like how everything was working from the ground up. I really liked this. It was 5 years. First year was C, second year was C++, and then there was a bit of everything. You could take C Sharp, Java, still a lot of C++, and then more management module towards the second part of the school, so fourth and fifth year. So yeah, that's how I got started. And during that journey, in the last 3 years, you have so the school is called Epitech, and you have what they call Epitech Innovative Project. So you form a group, um, and you come up with a subject that is innovative. In our case, it was a light client, so using a Raspberry Pi to have a remote desktop. And I was working on the client side, and I decided to use this for this because at some points during my learning years, we had a weekend project on metaprogramming using C++, and it was a lot of interesting techniques which I really liked. And it was everything from Andre's book, Modern C++ Design, which wasn't named in the exercise, in the weekend exercise. So after that was concluded, I sought out more information. I found Andre's book, and then I looked into what else did Andre do, and that's how I discovered D.
Oh, that's cool. Well, when you were exposed to all those different languages, did you gravitate to any one of them in particular?
So it was C derivatives.
Hmm.
Because I started with C, and then I learned C++ in my first internship, and then in my second year at Epitech. And I quite liked C++. I liked how I could understand what the machine was doing.
Hmm.
That was very nice. I wasn't originally very drawn to higher level languages. We tried OCaml in second year. I gave up that module pretty quickly because I didn't grasp functional programming at the time. And I think my experience with compilers have made me like to use language a lot more nowadays. But yeah, at the time I was very procedural and C derivatives.
I see. Um, and so in that case, then when you got to D, when you first discovered D, it wasn't too hard to pick up for you, I would guess, by that point.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it was quite easy. So I bought Andre's book. I started to read it. What I really liked about it is it explained not only the what but the whys and
Hmm.
why we did things a certain way and how things link together. That was really helpful for me, and now it feels very natural for me to write code in D.
Hmm.
It's a way I think. I've had periods where I worked in other languages, C# and Go mainly, uh, but I find myself quite often thinking how I would represent a certain problem in D and then translating it into the other language.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's a common thing for people who pick up D regularly. Yeah. Um, well, I wonder during that time when you were learning in the school, um, the projects you were working on, the programming you were doing, was it just for your schoolwork, or were you doing like hobby projects? Were you making games, or anything of that nature?
So that school didn't leave me any time for hobby project.
I see.
It
Yeah.
was really intense. It was not a public school,
Hmm.
so we didn't. I don't think I had vacation for the first 2 years.
Wow.
Um, it was just project after project, but it was really exciting and it didn't feel like work.
Mm,
So I really didn't mind. But we would work. We would work on weekends as well, because you just had projects to finish and you had a lot of projects concurrently.
mm, so no game jams or hackathons for you then?
We did have some. Well, we did do some game development as part of the school courses,
I see.
but no extracurricular activity. And when it came to the game development, to be honest, I was more on the backend side. So second year end of year project was a game, fully featured game with obviously the UI multiplayer, and so you needed a server.
Hmm.
And when we created the group, I volunteered for the server right away.
Well, yeah. Okay. And what drew you to that? I mean, why were you interested in that side of things?
Um, I think I could represent things better in my head when I was thinking about the code. I didn't really need the appeal of the graphics. Um, yeah, that's. I know a lot of my co classmates at the time. They quite like web development. So my university had multiple periods of internship, 3 periods over 5 years. And the very first one is at the end of the first year. So when you're at the end of the first year, you only know C. You don't, you cannot, you're not really useful in the company setting. Um, so most people go to do web development in web agencies. But I ended up going to China for 6 months and doing some C++ development, which was quite unique and very interesting for me.
Tell me a little bit about that, because I we're going to get to Korea in just a little bit, but I I haven't heard anybody tell me what it's like working in China, programming in China.
Um, it was interesting. So I had two internships in China actually at the end of the first and the third year, 6 and 8 months. So I spent quite a bit of time there. I was lucky to get this opportunity through a contact. Um, my So I was in a IT department of maybe 80 people, and
Mm,
there were two people speaking English. Um, I was in a quite rural area, not in the city, not in the big city. So it was a bit challenging in that regard. What I found very interesting is how much resources they had available. So it's a completely different environment from what I was used to, right?
mm,
You don't go on Google by default, and you have pretty much everything translated in Chinese. Um, so that was quite interesting to see. My work um, was a bit separate from the rest of the people, so was mostly collecting data from sensors and aggregating it and providing it to my internship supervisor, who was French.
mm, mm, mm. Well, I'm curious though about the work environment there because I remember in 2003 I was working at a little Korean startup doing a backend in Java. And it's the only programming job I've ever had in my life. I did a couple little contracts after that, but this was my first exposure to any kind of um, software company in the work environment. So I had nothing to compare it to. I had already been in Korea for several years, and one of the things that surprised me was it's not well, the work environment is there was kind of laid back compared to other Korean companies, but we did often spend long hours um, in the office. I remember going in. We had a meeting with our partner on Monday morning, and I went in on Friday morning. I didn't go home until Friday evening. Right, I spent the whole weekend there, slept under the desk, that kind of thing. Um, but then there was also like the differences in the internet, the interface, right? So I remember getting I implemented some error handling, and as I recall, at the time, it was just starting to become a thing where they would show the error message. They put you back on the form, the original form, with the error message in red above the text
Mhm.
field. That was just becoming a thing around that time. But in Korea, that was not what people were used to. So I mean, I had implemented that, and then they're like, "Wait a minute, no, this is not how you do it." I'm like, "What?" and so, I mean, did you encounter those kinds of surprises or problems?
Well, luckily my internship supervisor was French, so in
Hmm.
terms of expectation, it was much easier to yeah, it was much easier. There was a lot of domain knowledge I didn't know because I was in a foundry. That was to be acquired, but that wasn't culture specific. The one thing that was culture specific that struck me quite early on was that people were not very eager to say no.
Hmm.
So when I first started, and they wouldn't be eager to tell you if they didn't understand. When I first started, I went to someone and I said, "Well, because I need sensor reading data, I would need access to that SQL server. Could you give me a read-only access so I can start to explore?" And she said, "Yes, yes." And when I came back at the end of the week, and I'm like, "So no, I'm all set up. Can I do you have the account for me?" And she said, "Yes, yes." No, where are we on the account? So not a yes no question. And she said yes,
Mm,
yes. I'm like, yeah, I think we have to start from the beginning. Um, but I was quite isolated in China in terms of in terms of dealing with people, local people, since I was mostly a bridge between local people and my internship supervisor. So that was kind of okay. I mean, not hard. Korea was a bit different, as you know.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
As but no, China was fairly easy in that regard. And I was also still an intern, right? I was
Right.
first time I was 19, and second time I was 21. So they didn't expect me to sleep in the office for a weekend.
Right, of course. Well, you never know with these companies. Um, okay, so let's get back to your path to D then. So you picked up D at that school you were at, and what did you do with it after that?
I started to do my I started to do a few projects with it. Most of the projects we had at school were at a defined language, um, except for the math project. And then the innovative project, the particular innovative project EIP, you were free to choose whatever you wanted. So I thought, I quite like this language. I can think of reason in it quite easily. So I'm gonna use it to make this project. Um, After 3 years, I thought it was a terrible mistake. I had a yes, my first encounter with my first real project with D was a bit difficult, um, because I was starting to do things that not a lot of people have done before, and the path was not as well trodden as it would have been with C or C++.
And what year was this?
Um,
This was
that,
2014?
That was 2013 when I started, mid 2013 when I started, and the project ended in 2015.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, keep going. Sorry. Yeah.
Um, yeah, no, no, sure. um, yeah, so it was quite difficult. Obviously, my engineering skills, my programming skills were also much weaker at the time
Mhm,
because I was still a student. So it was a bit difficult. I wanted to so One of the reasons I started to contribute to VibeD is because VibeD didn't. I wanted to interface with a Java framework, and VibeD didn't have the mean for me to interface with that Java framework. I
mhm,
was using the REST API generator, so I did rewrite a good chunk of the generator to support TIS. Found a few compiler bugs in the process. Then I realized I couldn't really compile for my Raspberry Pi, which is ARM, 32
mhm,
bits at the time. So I implemented some feature in Dub to make it easier. Later found out a much easier way to do it, but that's when I started to contribute with Dub. Dub didn't have a test suite at the time, so I wrote the first test suite. Um, not my proudest work, to be honest, but it it needed a test suite. So my first approach into making that thin client was to make a libpam module
mm,
for authentication. I would authenticate against our Java server. Problem is, when I first tried that, I got an error because the TLS was too big, and
mm,
libpam refused to load my SO module. So I ended up ditching the SO approach. So shared library also was a bit of a pain.
mm,
Ended up ditching the SO approach and going with just a binary, replacing the login binary. That worked quite well in the end. I was using GTKD, which worked. That worked very well.
mm,
Um, One turning moment for me was watching Adam Rupi talk at DConf in 2014, I believe, at Facebook.
mhm.
Was it 14 or 15? 14, I think,
Yeah.
where I was trying very hard to make the runtime IP on some things, and Adam went on screen and was like, "Hey, the compiler doesn't actually care about the layout; it just cares about the size. So you can make a U byte of 64 bytes and he will be happy. And that kind of changed my attitude toward things a bit, and that made working with that project a lot easier.
Mm, mm. Yeah, and that's one of the great things about DConf, right? Yeah, that kind of stuff
Yes.
pops up all the time. So that was going to be my next question was, as you were getting into D at the time, you were also kind of getting into the community. Yeah, you were participating in the forums and that kind of thing and interacting on the boards. And your DConf 2014 was your first DConf, yes?
Yes. So I was an exchange student in Southern California at the time, and I had a break just at the right time.
Hmm.
So I decided to drive up to San Francisco to attend the DConf. It was a really good experience. I met a lot of interesting people. I saw a lot of very interesting and illuminating talks.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and I've been to every DConf, physical DConf since then.
Yeah, that one I missed that one, and I missed 2015, so I didn't meet you there. We met, I guess, in 2016 in Berlin,
Berlin.
probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, because I went to 2013, and I so wanted to go to the next two, but couldn't justify it at the time. When did you start working at Sociomantic? Because I know that's the next big step on your D path. Uh,
Right.
when did they hire
So
you?
Um, I started in March 2015. So actually, it ties up to the conference. Before I went to the conference, I watched a few talk from 2013. There was a concurrent garbage collector talk by Leandro Lucarella, which I found amazing. Um, and so when I went to DConf, I met with a few people there, and I really enjoyed the conversations I had. There was Luca. No, Luca wasn't here. Sorry, there was Michael Sprasson, Dicebot, and Don Clockston. Um, so we chatted for a while, and I really enjoyed the what I heard. After when it was time to apply for my final internship, which is not really an internship because you don't have to go to school, so it's usually just a regular enter the workforce moment. I applied to Sociomantic, um, and I joined them in March 2015, and I
Well,
stayed there. Yeah,
Well, I
good.
was going to say, we have people in the community now who have, come along after Sociomantic is no longer around. So, can, why don't you explain what Sociomantic was and what they did and what you did there?
Right. So Sociomantic was a real-time bidding platform. Essentially, you would go to a website and there would be a tiny delay created 50 milliseconds or so. And in that delay, the website would would connect to a supply-side platform, let's say Google, that would then connect with us, a demand-side platform, and we would know who is visiting if we had any tracking cookie existing in the past, and we would decide, well, we think that person might be a good fit they might be interested in buying shoes, so we will serve ad for shoes. And the way it has happened is, so the supply side platform contacts multiple demand side platform, who themselves have multiple clients, and then you make a bid. So you say, I want to spend 3 cents on that person. Uh, the um, the highest bidder wins with the bid of the second bidder. So I think it's called a Dutch auction. Um, and so you have a very strong latency requirement for that industry. When I joined the company, I was in the optimization team. So we were responsible with adjusting parameters to make sure that our metrics were good or were optimized. So making sure we don't show an ad too often or not often enough, depending on what we see, making sure we bid the right amount, and so on and so forth. That was my first year in Sociomantic, and then I transitioned to another team, which was reporting team, which was more about making sure that we ingested the massive amount of data we were getting correctly, and it was properly reported into our system. That was a more less mathy thing, more engineering part.
I never met the founders. So they started as they were it was a graduate project they did, graduate school project or something.
Um, I'm not quite sure. So I've met two of them because they were still very actively involved with the company.
Hmm.
I remember 2009 for as a founding year, but probably you have a much better history than me.
Hmm.
I do know they were acquired in 2014, I believe in November 2014,
Hmm.
by a much larger UK company. And for a while, things continued just as before because the business was doing quite well.
Yeah, I was just trying to remember because I know they chose D, and we were the community was kind of ecstatic about that at the time when we first found out about them, and that was D1 actually. And
Yep.
you were involved in the transition to D2, weren't you?
Yes. It was still D1 when I joined Sociomantic.
Hmm.
And I was quite interested in doing the transition. So I spent quite a bit of extra time on that. Funnily, learning D1, which was obviously bit more limited and much closer to C++, I think made me a better D programmer.
Hmm.
Sociomantic's code base was quite different from what I was used to seeing as idiomatic D.
Hmm.
It was very, very OOP, classes interface. We were making very good use of that. Much simpler, I would say. So no usage of French, no a bit less meta programming and CTFE, just because D1 didn't have the capability. We did maintain our own D1 compiler for a while, and we did backport quite a few fixes from D2. So as time passed, we started to use CTFE more because the compiler just got up.
Hmm.
Um, and during 2 years, we gradually transition to D2. So you're right. We had Tango, and then we had built a library on top of it, Ocean, and we had built other libraries on top of it, and then obviously finally applications. Um, Ocean was really our standard library. What we had to do the D2 transition essentially was redoing was well doing the whole transition process that upstream didn't really do it. But we had to do it because we couldn't just stop the system and work, for a few months on transitioning. Um, what we did was first splitting Tango into two, like the runtime did it,
Hmm.
to have the runtime on one side and the library on another side, which we then integrated with Ocean and ended up with the D1 runtime and Ocean being Tango and our extra layer on Tango. And transitioning that innermost library first and gradually transitioning. I picked one of the application I was maintaining, and I gradually transitioned all of its dependency until it was compiling. So that was quite a long process, but it was a very interesting one, and it worked quite well because everything ended up working in D2. And Ocean and the other library that Sociomantic wrote are still open source today.
How long did you stay at Sociomantic? You started to say that earlier before I interrupted you. When did you leave them?
Exactly 3 years and 2 months.
Ah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So
So I joined in March 2015, and I left in May 2020, 2018. Sorry.
yeah, all right, and that brings us to the next stage. And I know that Sociomantic hosted DConf in Berlin, and that's when we first moved to because they were based in Berlin. So that's when we
Yeah.
first started doing DConf in Europe, and we were there in 2016 and 2017. And in 2018, we were in Munich, and we had a company that is not associated with D. They're actually a C++ firm, but they were hosting us because the owner is somebody Andre knows, and he offered to host us. So we were there in Munich, and this story, I still feel guilty about this. I remember this was the first time I was deeply involved in preparing for DConf. And I had been peripherally involved in 2017. I started working with the foundation in 2016, running the blog. And by 2017, I was doing other stuff. So I was helping a little bit with DConf. But in 2018, I was more deeply involved. And we had a returnee discount that we were offering for registration. And so people could email me and I would set it up so they could get a big discount on the registration. And I got an email from a Korean woman saying, "My name is Mathias Lang, and I attended DConf last year. I want the discount." Now I live in Korea, and I know you. I knew you by then, and I'm like, "This is not Matt." And I thought it was some scammer, and I replied, I guess a little bit rudely, "I know Mathias Lang. You're not Matthias, you know." So I show up in Berlin, and you did email me later for the discount, but you didn't say anything else in the
I
email. And I didn't know, I think, until I got to Munich. I think that's where you told me that you were coming to Korea. Or did you email me before then and tell me?
No, I think I contacted you on Slack,
Okay.
but or maybe email. I don't. I just remember that that post he was very distraught by your reply.
Oh, it was a guy, not a woman.
No. It was
Oh,
a woman. It was great. Yeah,
oh
and
yeah.
but she emailed me saying, "What do I do?"
I hope I didn't make her cry. Oh my gosh. Um,
uh,
yeah. So yeah, I was pretty surprised that you were coming to Korea, and I guess Mike Franklin was already here, but I didn't know him at the time. I hadn't met him yet. I
yeah.
had seen his handle on GitHub. He used a Korean phrase or something in English, but yeah. So you uh, came to Korea right after DConf 2018. Uh,
Yes.
Tell us about that. How did that happen, and what was that all about?
Uh, it was a bit of luck and a bit of skill. So there was this company, this blockchain company that I CEO'd in Korea, and they needed more developers. They were interested in using D, so they reached out to a hiring firm in London that ended up contacting quite a few people at Sociomantic, as I found out like later. And I went through the process, um, and it was quite well. It was quite interesting. And in December of that year, I think they told me, "Well, the job is yours if you want it." And so I wasn't sure all along the process if I would go or not. Um, but it was a time where I figured a change would be good. I came to Berlin just also randomly. The first time I set foot in Berlin was 1 week before I started working. Uh, so I moved to Berlin for the job, and I figured I could move to Korea for the job as well. Um, so I discussed with the company, and I decided I would fly directly from Munich after DConf, because it wouldn't make sense to fly me to Korea and then fly back 2 months later. It was supposed to be a remote job with a training period of 1 year, which sounded a bit long, but I didn't mind. So yes, uh, I closed down everything in Berlin, and I took a train to a bus actually to go to Munich, and then from Munich I flew to Korea. Um, and actually, I would always remember, as I was in Munich, sitting next to Andre, I got an email with various information about the upcoming job, and one sentence caught my eye: is "You will be writing in Go." And so
That's great.
that was so I think that was on the second day of the conference, and on the first day I was all excited about there was a new company in Korea starting to use D, and then I yeah, the day after I was like, oh well, actually guys. um so that was interesting because I didn't know a single thing about Go except that it was a programming language. So I made sure I downloaded everything I could. Didn't start learning out of respect during the conference, but on the plane, I did quite a bit of studying. I was also exposed to some more new tools, which at the time I didn't realize they were as important as they were. But for example, the online learning course of Go, where you can just like write code online, which we nowadays have in D, but I think at the time we didn't have that.
Mhm.
And I thought, oh, this is actually quite convenient to learn. So it was also interesting to learn to see how other languages were doing it. Um, yeah, so flew to Korea, learned Go, and started to work in Go. But luckily, we pivoted back to D at some point.
Mhm. Yeah, and that was pretty cool. And so the company went through some transformations while you were there, and I actually got to meet your fellow programmers while you were there, and
Yeah.
we had a few D meetups here, and they gave us the space for a couple of them, and I remember the first one we did with that wasn't just me and you and Mike Franklin. The first big one we did was uh, at the first offices you had, and I had this presentation prepared about D, and I was expecting my audience to, know something about C and C++, and they were all beginner like JavaScript programmers, and I'm like, oh gosh, that was a fun presentation. Had to do a pivot, um, but it was fun. Anyway, so you stayed here what, about 4 years? A little over 4 years or something? Almost
Um,
5?
For no 4 years, almost 4 years to the day. Actually,
Yeah.
I left Korea in April 2022.
Yeah,
So
wow. I can't
almost
believe
2
it's
years.
been 2 years already. That's, yeah, wow.
Time
So
flies.
yeah, right. And, so you moved back to Europe, and now you're working with Symmetry. So,
Yes.
um, you're also, now part of the core team, working with the D Foundation, and you've been, doing that now for quite a while. Um, Tell us how that came about.
Um, right. So I started to contribute to D more and more. I really enjoyed working on DMD, especially after it was converted to D. Um, and at some point, I started to do a bit more, um, well, not management thing, but housekeeping, for example, like looking at bugs, trying to classify things. Um, I was interested in, well, in participating more, and I was one of the people that attempted to move issues from Bugzilla to GitHub. Obviously, that didn't work out quite well. I think I moved one of the repository. Then there were quite a few questions and not enough time to do that uh, with my work in Korea. So, but in the process of doing that, I ended up having admin access to the GitHub D-Lang organization. And so I also started to try to be more proactive about certain things, which I think we should do better. One of them was inviting contributors. So I've tried to more proactively invite people in the organization when I saw people that were steady and made good contribution. I think that worked out quite well. And in general, I tend to go where I'm needed, be it in my open source contribution or at work. Um, so at some point, I started to contribute quite heavily on Dub, just because I heard a lot of complaint about Dub, but it didn't seem that we were taking enough action on that. So I decided I should take actions. Um, and yeah, I just gradually try to fix things, mostly scratching my own itch, but sometimes going where I'm needed.
Yeah, my memory is terrible now, and had I thought about this before the interview, I would have looked it up. But I'm trying to remember if at what point we started bringing you into the monthly meetings, because I know our meetings our meetings started as quarterly meetings, just with the industry folks, and we would do uh, uh, the first half of the meeting focused on their stuff, and then we would focus on some foundation stuff after. And then at some point, we realized, well, we ought to start having monthly meetings for the foundation stuff. And I'm trying to remember, were you there for those from the very beginning, or did we bring you in later?
I think you brought me in a bit later.
Yeah,
Um, it
you were.
probably came about because we knew each other in Korea and we probably discussed it,
Yeah,
and you knew I had a strong interest in contributing. So
yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I think it was about the proposal you brought that one time, but yeah, I'm just trying to remember if you were the first one we brought in, or if it was Robert or who. But yeah, it doesn't matter at this point, I guess. I'm just a history buff, and I always think about that kind of thing. But yeah, so um, you are mostly focused. You're not contributing so much to the compiler. You're mostly focused on Dub and. I guess sometimes the CI, you do work on that, and the server stuff. So you are pretty much the de facto dub guy now.
yeah,
Yeah. Was that what you set out to do? I mean, were you expecting that to happen?
is does anyone set out to do the dub maintainer? No. Uh, I so I've contributed quite a bit to DMD when I was in Korea
Mhm.
because well because we needed to have a good C++ interop. So that was a big part of my contributions in Korea, and preview in because I wanted better lifetime control, which is tied to C++. But then in when I pivoted and I came back to Europe, um, I didn't have those needs anymore, and I figured I could spend some time on improving Dub.
Mm.
And yeah, it was a lot of refactorings and various improvements. There were quite a few bug fixes that just needed to be picked up and acted on. Um, but I also wanted to have a holistic view of it. One of the issue I see with Dub is that um, it it had a vision for a while, but Zonke getting busy, Zonke being the original implementer, the main maintainer for a while, getting busy. Some quite a few contributions arrived, and they weren't while they were probably good feature, some of them didn't really fit with the vision.
Mm.
um, so I wanted to see what was there, what people needed. That's the most important to me. Is I know my own needs, but I don't know what other people need. And it's good to either be able to realize you have a hole in your requirements, or you can help people use an already existing feature a bit better. Uh, so doing that work, yes, made me the de facto maintainer. Um, and my contribution, to be honest, vary. Last year, I had quite a good year on contributing to Dub. For the last 6 months, I think I've been pretty quiet because I've been busy with other things. But I still have long-term items I want to fix, so I plan to return to it, hopefully sooner than later.
Well, the items that you want to get to, and the ones you've worked on in the recent past, what's the focus there?
Um, so there's a very obvious one, which is the way we handle dependency. At the moment, you can have configurations. So you have your regular dub file, let's say dub.json, and then you can have configuration in it. The problem is dub aggregates all the dependencies into this configuration together. And that's when I went through the issue list, this has been reported, I don't know, maybe 20 times in different ways, shape, and form. And it's something that people obviously don't expect to work this way. It's very common, for example, to have unit test only dependencies. But the problem at the moment is to unit test only dependencies are also they are not linked in. so they don't really have an effect on the final compilation, but dub still try to parse them, which creates friction. So that's one big item that I want to fix, because it's just the most visible dub bug for people. So I usually categorize them by how many people would hit them or how impactful they are. If there's an easy workaround, for example, they might go a bit lower in the list, but it's something that is very visible and hard to work around. So that's that would be my focus. I've done most of my contribution on the package manager. So Dub is quite well separated in its code base between the package manager and the build system. I'm quite happy with where the package manager is at the moment, minus that bug. And but the build system, I think, still needs a lot of love, and there's simple thing that can be done to it to make it so much better. For example, parallel compilation. I just didn't have time to get to it yet.
What about multi-language support?
That's something with a lot of unknowns,
Mm,
right? So Dub originally was meant to be very declarative. You cannot have loops, you cannot have if condition. Really, it's really declarative. That is intended to be restrictive enough so that you can do more with it, right? You have
mm,
better guarantees. I think that would be very limiting if you go to multi-language support.
mhm,
So at the moment, the way I've done multi-language support was just to use pre-generate command, pre-built command to just shell out to another tool.
mhm,
Um, it would be good to have better support for, especially for like C and C++, because they are the easy target.
mhm.
But I feel like there's still quite a lot of existing feature that needs to be improved before I turn my attention to that.
I see. Okay. Yeah. Um, well, we can move away from Dub for a little bit here because you mentioned C and C++, and another thing that you have been involved pretty somewhat heavily with is the C++ API interaction between
Yeah.
D and C++. Yeah, so the C++ interface. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. You gave a talk about that at DConf in 2022 about the state of C++ interfacing. Has that improved since then?
Yes, quite a bit. Well, there's the interfacing has been good for a while, but there's been a Symmetry autonomous code project which I mentored, involving Emmanuel Nyako,
Mhm.
and he worked on bringing on binding the standard library container in D,
Mm.
and he's done a good job. I was quite impressed, and so that's under a dlang repository. So if you go to GitHub dlang/stdcpp,
Mhm.
there's a binding there. We can always add more binding because obviously there's a lot of containers, and then some specific special cases, for example, vectors of pool. But overall, it works quite well. It's tested on multiple platforms, and Emmanuel has also taken on himself to improve the documentation,
Oh, yeah.
um, which is something we need,
Yeah.
and I never really got to it.
Mm.
He made a pull request, so I'm quite happy with the way things have evolved since that talk. Yes.
Yeah, and as I understand it, Manuel plans to take that container project all the way to the finish line, even
Yeah.
beyond the Symmetry Autumn of Code. Always happy to see when somebody finishes SEAC and continues to work on it.
Yeah.
What what is your thoughts? What are your thoughts on the Symmetry Autumn of Code? This was the first one you mentored, right?
Yes.
Uh,
No.
the second?
Um, Was I? No, I think I was a judge last time.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah. So first one I mentored. I think it's quite it's a very good initiative.
Uh,
If I could do it when I was a student, I would have liked to do it. With Emmanuel, it was quite easy because he's quite self-driven. So we had a weekly call and just making sure that he wasn't blocked, and I was giving him mostly direction. So it's really useful when you get a student that is interested and driven,
mhm,
and they just need a bit of guidance sometimes of like when I watch Adam Rupi's talk, and I was like, oh, okay, I don't need to match the layout, I just need to match the size.
mhm,
And I would have been lost in the weeds for a long time if I didn't see that. And the same did happen with Emmanuel. Sometimes I was like, well, you don't actually need to handle that because it doesn't matter in D.
mhm.
um, so it was a very good experience, and I'm quite happy. Symmetry is helping with that, and people are mentoring.
Yeah, and I'm really happy with the way people have, either finished their projects or continued to work on them after the event. The percentage of people who keep working has been pretty good. And I know some of the SEAC participants actually ended up with jobs after SEAC, so D jobs. So that was pretty good
Yeah.
for them too. So yeah, I think Symmetry Autumn of Code is awesome, and we really thank Symmetry for that. And we will be doing Symmetry Autumn of Code this year again, and going forward into the foreseeable future. So I have
Good.
heard nothing contrary to that. Um, Great. Oh, you were going to say something?
I, Yeah, I wanted just to add to that. I think in general, we should do definitely more outreach to students, to
Mm,
universities. If we look into our history as a community, there's quite a few advances that have been made by people who were students at the time. Sebastian Wilsbach is an obvious example. He brought a lot of energy and a lot of new ideas to the language,
mhm,
and yeah, he contributed quite a bit to run.dlang.org and a few things like this, which at the time I think many people didn't really see the interest, myself included.
mhm,
And after it was in place, it was very obvious that it was a game changer.
mhm,
So I think doing outreach to university would be very beneficial for D, and that's one of the things I wanted to do in Korea before COVID hits.
mhm, mhm. Talking about new language features and all of that, I've had now Martin and Razvan and Dennis all pretty much core team members on here, and yeah, here we go. This is the big part. I've asked everybody what they are looking forward to about the things. We've talked about a lot of changes. We've talked about additions. We've talked about new directions. Language server protocol built into the compiler. Compiler is a daemon. Um, Safe by default. All kinds of stuff we've talked about. What is top for you right now? I mean, not in terms of what you're working on, but in terms of interest. What has your attention the most from the things we've been discussing?
Right. So only the thing we've been discussing, not the things I want, right?
Well, we'll get to that too. But first, what are you looking forward
The-
to that we've been discussing?
um, so editions are interesting to me.
Mhm,
Uh, Not so much for the mechanism itself. I think there's other ways to do it, but for what they allow us to do,
mhm,
one of the advantage of the is that it is an old and new language at the same time. Um, it's been around for 2 decades, over 2 decades. You know that better than anyone, having done the history of D. It's obviously not new. It's quite established, but it's also still evolving, and we're still adding useful and new features. Um, and I think that's quite important for language. Even C++ has realized that they need to iterate more quickly. So there was recently, well, last year, I think, a pushback because of the way deprecation were handled. And I think that has had a whiplash effect in that we stopped removing things, which is part of improving. So I think editions being there will be very helpful to set us again on that path. Other than that, I think something like a compiler as a daemon is an idea I've been playing with for a long time. So having something like dubwatch would be very useful.
Mm-hmm.
I know it would make a lot of people very happy.
Mm-hmm.
I personally, I'm not extremely interested in it, but it's one of the things that keeps on coming back. The compilation speed and the way dub handle things, and obviously it's the right way to do it. So those two items are probably pretty high on my list. And then finishing preview in is what I would like to do, which is hampered by a CTFE bug, but that's another story.
So that's the answer to the question of what you want is preview equals in.
No, the thing we discussed, because previewing has been in the compiler for a few years. So,
Yeah.
and I know Attila is what Attila is doing at the moment is reducing trying to finish previews.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if I want to work with him, I know that's one of the things I want to contribute on.
Okay. So what about your wish list then? What's separate from what we've been discussing? Things you wish we were discussing.
Right. There's one thing on the list is we I find that templates are really useful, right? They are a cornerstone of D, but I also find them to be very blunt instruments
Mm-hmm.
because they are essentially copy pasting code. And have all hit those issues where you have a const container of an element is very different from a container of a const element, and all those things where you realize that you're hitting the limitation of a nominal type system because they are just completely different type for the compiler. And um, I'm quite interested in concepts as to use a C++ term, and I think D could benefit in looking at ways to enable, because we've very much gone the way of structural typing, with ranges being a cornerstone of D, with the way we built everything around ranges. So having the ability to better handle structural typing in your code, I think would be very beneficial for us. It would be something novel, uh, instead of sometimes playing catch up with safety. It would be novel, and it would be I think quite interesting for developers. So to give you an example, just having input range A equal whatever, and B input range be the ID of a range. At the moment, we have interfaces to do that, but that's obviously not what we want, and that's not used very much.
Mm. Well, have you, speaking of ranges, have you talked to Jonathan about his range proposal?
No, no, I haven't. I've been a bit disconnected from D for the last 4 to 6 months, and I
Uh-huh.
think that range proposal came around that time. I know there's a huge trend on the forum, and
Mm-hmm.
I would like to get the gist of it,
Mm-hmm.
just. But no, I haven't. I haven't talked to him. I think that's so. Range is the obvious example,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that's more of a language feature than really related to range.
Mm-hmm.
Although it's obviously good to keep the use case in mind while designing the feature.
Before we tie this off, what would you say to anyone out there who's thinking of contributing to D, wondering how to contribute to D? Um, what would you say to them?
Um, I would say pick something that is that matters to you, that is not going to be extremely controversial, and just run with it, and ask for forgiveness rather than permission.
That's good advice, I think. And I would, you touched on something earlier, when we talked about Dub, and you had no expectation of ever becoming the Dub maintainer. It just started out as just small contributions, and then there you are. And I started out just running the blog. The blog was my idea. I started out running it, and now I'm doing interviews here and all kinds of other stuff. I got my hands in the money, the bank account now, and that's scary. I'm not sure that's something anyone should aspire to, but um, yeah, so there's you never know where your contributions will lead you, and many people have started out making small contributions and ended up making good money as deprogrammers for some of the shops out there. So
Yeah.
that's yeah.
And it's something I really want to thank Walter for, because his style of management is pretty hands off. And if there's
Mm.
something you care about and you come to him and say, I want to do it, sure. That's how I got my admin access to DLang. Actually, I was like, I want to do this, and Walter was like, no problem, here you go.
Yeah, yeah, and that is it is liberating. And I've talked about that with Dennis in the last conversation, how it was a little strange to me in the beginning because I expected it wouldn't be like that, and then it's like that, and I'm like, whoa. But yeah, it is a liberating thing. Mathis, I want to thank you for joining me for this conversation. I know a lot of people are reluctant to do it, but you didn't hesitate when I asked. You jumped right in. And I do want to put you on the spot here, real quick, before we go. Are you submitting a DConf talk?
uh, I always feel like I don't have enough material for a DConf talk, although I probably do. At at the moment, I have no plan to do it. When is the deadline?
May 17th. May 17th for everybody listening. May 17th. This will be
May
published
17th.
before then.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
Okay. So everybody listening, please submit a DConf talk so I don't have to.
yeah, everybody, all of you. All right. Thanks, Matthias. And I'll see you
Thanks.
soon.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.